know I'm an action junkie. I want to see that type of stuff.
Welcome to the Weekly Fix podcast, where we're just two friends talking about our passions within movies, TV shows, gaming, and comics. Thanks for checking out the podcast. We hope you like it.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Weekly Fix. My name is Jacob, and joining me, as always, is Zane. And I'm super pumped for this episode because me and Zane are fresh out of the movie theaters. And if you know anything about us, we absolutely love the movie. So this is going to be an awesome episode because, yes, we are going to be breaking down Gladiator II. Now, I know we both talked about this movie in probably not the most excited terms at the beginning of this month, but I got to say, I'm very excited to talk about it, especially since we just got out of the theaters and it's fresh off of our minds. But before we get into any of those things, we do have some other things we're going to be talking about for this episode. And before we get into those things, Zane, how are you doing this week?
Man, I'm doing good. It is the busy time. I know we said that last week, but it's not going to stop. That is going to be the case. I know you guys are traveling this week. We have family coming into town. We have a birthday to celebrate, which I'm super excited about. My daughter turning 4. So cool. And then Thanksgiving, what a wonderful time to just reflect and be thankful about all that God has given you and what he's allowed you to have and what he's allowed you to produce into other people's lives. And it's really just been such a great season already. But boy, has it been busy. So I'm good. This was a fast weekend, but I'm ready for a good work week and hopefully a wonderful Thanksgiving. Now you're not going into a work week, right? You're done for the week.
No, I actually am still working. I don't have,
never mind.
dude. Yeah, I wish I was off for the whole week. No, but we are traveling this week. We are going to be heading back up to West Virginia, which I'm super excited about. Not looking forward to the drive, but it'll be worth it once we get back to see our family. And like you said, I think the perfect way to explain this past week or this weekend, and really just this past week, and I think all time moving forward, is fast. I think everything is going so crazy right now. So I think having Thanksgiving is a really great time right now, just to slow down a little bit and just to be thankful for all that we have been given. Like you just touched on, we have been so blessed, just, I know me and my wife personally in our lives, and I know you reflect that same sentiment, just feeling so blessed with how much God has given to us and blessed us with. We've had so many things happen this year. You beating cancer, us moving to Jacksonville. If those weren't enough things right there just to be thankful for and just to sing his praises, I don't know what else is. But no, it's going to be so exciting getting into the holiday season. I, for one, love Thanksgiving, not only for just the food, but just for, like you said, just to reflect and be thankful for some of the things that we've been given. And yeah, I'm super pumped for everything coming up. We actually had a really great time at the movie theaters this evening. So anytime I'm on high on a lot of emotions and thankfulness right now because it's just such a good weekend for us. And it was fast paced, but sometimes those are the best ones. So I'm super pumped for what's to come. And yeah, the holiday season is always jam-packed.
Yeah, it really is. But man, this is my favorite time of the year. I love this time of the year. And we have a bunch of exciting stuff coming up, not only just in our lives, but also for the podcast. We got some stuff planned, so I'm excited. But one of the things that is not going to be happening today, I know it is our last episode of the month. However, because we do have this Gladiator 2 review, we kind of wanted to keep that separate. So Comic Corner is going to be delayed until next week. So that's when we will do that and release that. So be looking forward to that for next week's episode if you are interested in hearing about The Last Ronin.
And I think the cool thing about this Comic Corner is I think it really does fit in perfectly with the movie that we get to go watch the day of filming this podcast. Is Gladiator 2 and Last Ronin have a lot of the same vibe going on, which I thought is really cool. So I'm super excited to dive into that next week. Really excited to hear your reactions and where you're going to place this one because, as you all know, this is an all-time favorite for me. It's actually the comic book that got me into comics because before it, I had never read any comics. So super pumped to talk about that next week. And yeah, Gladiator 2 was absolutely awesome just to be in the movie theaters again. I think it was a really great time. But before we get into any of that, let's talk about something that you did not necessarily enjoy all that much. And if you guys aren't familiar, last week on the podcast, we did talk a little bit about Peacemaker and how James Gunn is saying that this is canon to his DC universe moving forward, with the exception of the Justice League scene at the very end. And we both kind of decided we're going to try to get to Peacemaker at some point before the next Superman movie comes out and the DC universe really takes off. You already went ahead and dove into Peacemaker a little bit, but you weren't as thrilled about it as I know a lot of people have said it's been such a great show and one of their favorite things to watch. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you experienced with those first couple episodes that you watched?
Yeah, it was a real shock to me. With coming off of such high praise, there was never a moment that I was kind of thinking I wasn't going to like this show. I had stayed clear of pretty much all spoilers. The only spoiler I had actually seen was the Justice League entrance at the end of the movie of the
Mhm.
show. So I had actually stayed clear of pretty much everything. And obliviously, I just didn't even look at what the content was of the show. I don't know what I was thinking, but boy, is it rough. You said first few episodes. I actually couldn't make it through the first episode because of how vulgar the first episode was. It was just way too much. And I just couldn't allow that to be in my home. There's so much stuff that I'm kind of going through, and I'm trying to reevaluate and become more consistent in every aspect of my life, but especially with the content that we do. Even maybe having this podcast here has made me kind of look at things harder through a harder lens, and especially uh, with putting out my opinions on things. And my opinion of this is that it's bad. That I personally couldn't get through watching it. It was just too vulgar, sexually, and then also just the language was excessive for no reason. If you want to use pervasive, that is the accurate word for this. I think I heard more f bombs in the first 20 minutes of that show than I did in the entire movie of uh, Deadpool and Wolverine. So I mean, it was rough. So I made the executive decision, kind of turn it off. That I'm not going to be watching that, which does make me sad for James Gunn, knowing his creative direction is going to be over the DCU, and that this was the kickoff essentially to his like sole product. Well, this is one of his like babies of creation. I just really was had a distaste for that and was saddened that that is what we got. And I know I'm late to the game on this, and I should have known. I guess I should have done my research, but I didn't. And man, was I disappointed. So yeah, not a great start for me.
Well, and you're not alone in not really having any idea about that because I was also kind of blown away when you said that as well because I feel like I never really heard anything about that. And it's crazy that you do bring up Deadpool and Wolverine because we go into those movies knowing what we're going to expect. And I feel like even if you didn't know the Deadpool universe and what they do with those movies, you understand what you're going into with those movies. They do a really good job of just overall marketing those things and letting you know that going into the movies, hey, there's a lot of foul language and stuff like that in it. I feel like I never heard anything with this show. I really only heard like people really enjoyed it and things like that. So that's been something that's been a little bit alarming to me as well because I hate those things for the sake of doing it. I feel like there's so many things in today's society, especially with media and things like that, that they're only doing it just because they have the opportunity to. They slap that R rating on there and they feel like they can say and do whatever they want. And I just hate that because I feel like that's just not good writing. And I feel like it's just laziness. I feel like those words and stuff just spew laziness for me personally. They always have. I hate, hearing them and things like that. So I never understood that. And so this has been a big concern for me as well when you did mention I didn't realize he had as much creative direction over Peacemaker as he did. So hearing you explain that to me that, yeah, this was one of his big projects. He actually delayed Guardians of the Galaxy 3 because he was in the process of doing this stuff. That does bring some concern for me for the DC universe moving forward, especially with the information that we've gotten recently, knowing that he is definitely going to have some R-rated projects in the DC universe. Now, I'm all for R-rated stuff when it's done appropriately. I think The Penguin is a perfect example of that. That definitely deserves an R rating, and it was done in a tasteful way that it didn't make you feel like you were just depriving yourself like of your humanity almost. So I'm a little bit
Yeah.
more concerned about that, but I do still have hope, and we talked about this a little bit. I don't see that happening with stuff like Superman. Superman's a very stoic character, very, human character. I think those are going to be some things that does bring some life still to the DC universe and does keep me excited. I don't really see that type of stuff being used in Deadpool or in Batman. So hopefully that is the way we can navigate through his upcoming DC universe is if he does have those R-rated things, it is marketed appropriately and we kind of know what we're getting into before we do that. I did not realize Peacemaker was the same way, and again, maybe that's just on us for maybe not doing our due diligence and our research, but overall, it really is just disappointing to kind of hear that from you after not even getting through a whole episode.
Yeah, and I did actually go look at the parent guide after it was, you know, right in my face, and I had already made the decision to stop watching. But yeah, there's essentially more stuff in that I would is worse for me than language. So I was like, man, I don't. if you're throwing all of that in there as well, I'm very glad I dipped out when I did, because it definitely would have been a repellent at that point. So
Yeah, so I think there is some cause for concern for us. We do want to try to keep it as clean as possible. I do still have faith in the DC universe. I'm still looking forward to it. I'm not going to lose faith in it just off of this show. How do you still feel, though? I know we both do have that same concern as like, is he going to go overboard with this stuff? Or do we have faith that he's going to reel it in for the projects like Superman and Batman and stuff like that? Or are you more concerned than you are excited at this point?
I'm not more concerned than I am excited. It's more concern for almost our culture as a whole, and that the projects that will get down the road will move towards R more frequently,
Mhm.
as opposed to staying in the PG-13 swim lane. I think that was one of the big knocks against Deadpool versus Wolverine. I'm actually sad that it performed as well as it did, because I don't want more of that content in Marvel. I'd rather keep it less vulgar, less
Absolutely.
more wholesome. So that's my worry. It's not necessarily that I think that the movies that are coming out that are slated are going to model this, because apparently this is just the character that he is. But I do worry about moving down the road what kind of characters these characters will evolve into, as we see more and more of our culture be okay with these things that I'm just not.
And again, it does go back to I think maybe more of our negligence. We're more well versed in Marvel. We know what Deadpool is, so we know what to expect. Maybe if we were more well versed in the DC universe and stuff like that, and the things they're going to do, maybe we knew that's how that character is going to be, and it wouldn't be quite as shocking to us. And a lot of you guys listening that probably watched the show are like, "You guys are crazy." I mean, this show is so old already at this point. But those are just kind of our concerns moving forward with the DC universe. I don't know that I'm going to even give it a shot yet. I haven't decided with all the other things I have going on and the other shows and movies we have coming out. It's hard sometimes to even go back and catch up. So hopefully it's not really such an essential show, which I don't think it's going to be, that I feel like I need to watch it for the upcoming DC universe, but it is something to know about for you guys moving forward if you guys haven't watched it as well. So, I think that's enough for the Peacemaker talk, and I'm excited for the next thing we're going to be talking about, which is Gladiator II. Now, we just, like I said, got straight out of the movie theater. I really had a great time. And I think I always have a great time at the movies, even when it's not such a great movie, because the atmosphere is always fun. We actually had a very packed theater for a Sunday afternoon at 5 o'clock. And I know we were both a little bit surprised about that. But before we get into any of the spoiler stuff, we're going to do a little bit of a non spoiler review for Gladiator 2. And I think the first thing coming off of the Peacemaker talk that I want to talk about is they did a really good job with the race movie. Now, there's a lot of gore and there's a lot of things like that in it. But overall, there's no language. I think the gore is really the big thing that you have as concern. There's no sexual stuff going on. There's no nudity. I thought that was absolutely fantastic for a movie like this, especially when you set it in an era that it is so easy to include those things. I mean, we see it with stuff like Game of Thrones, where there's a ton of nudity, ton of sexual stuff going on. There's a lot of language. This movie doesn't have any of that. And so I do want to sing its praises for that starting off this podcast, especially after we just got done with the Peacemaker talk, which I think is definitely something worth noting.
Yeah, and I did notice that. Now there are like some background imagery, such as statues and other
Mm-hmm.
stuff that, like, for very, very innocent eyes, you don't want to see. But before any of that is ever brought up, you definitely need to be watching out for the gore, because I got out and said this is a very gory movie, and I would
Yeah.
say this is almost 2024 level of gore for an R, as much worse gore level than the original Gladiator.
Oh, yeah.
And so that is a word of warning. If you have a soft stomach, if you do not, you are not okay with battle wounds caused by swords and medieval weaponry, then this is not the movie for you, because there is a lot of that. I don't think it's nonstop all the time, but when it is there, it is rough, and they don't
Mm-hmm.
hold back anything. There's a few beheadings and even some animal violence that is pretty over the top. So that is a word of warning for this, that there is some caution to be had if you are sensitive to that kind of stuff.
Now, I do got to say, for me personally, I thought some of that stuff was really, really cool. So, if you guys are into this stuff like that, because I know we do have a lot of horror fans out there, and there's a lot of people that really do like when people get creative with those type of things. I think they did a really, really great job with this movie. The gore was done in a good way. I don't have a soft stomach for that stuff. I think it's really cool to see how they're able to, get those things on the screen, make it look realistic. So, I thought they did a really good job with that. How did you feel about, one thing we like to talk about a lot is CGI, because CGI is one of those things that can really make or break a movie if it's so evident that you can tell it's CGI. I personally was looking for it in this movie because a movie like this, it's going to have a lot of it. I thought they did a really, really good job with the CGI in this movie. Did you feel the same way?
I thought it was fantastic. There was issues occasionally, especially when they broaden the horizons of their scope,
Yeah.
especially with the sea portions. I think the sea portions really stood out to me of like didn't look great, but for the most part, I would say this looked fantastic. I think it was very visually pleasing. It wasn't over the top. Some of the animals, I had moments where I was like,
Hmm.
doesn't look the best, but I never was. That was only because I was really looking for it. Because I'm going into this movie now with, hey, like, okay, like let's really see what this movie's going to get. Like, how is this movie going to do for me? And so I think these visuals were very top notch. I don't think there's anything that this movie should get a knock on because of visuals. If anything, I think they should get a leg up because I think everything was done very well. I think they used practical and digital mixed effects very well, and I don't have any issue with it. Uh, Kind of echoing what you said. You said it looked good, and I definitely would echo that.
And I think the important thing with CGI in particular is, as long as, this is my personal opinion, if it doesn't take me out of the movie, if I don't get distracted by it, I think you did a very good job. And I never found myself like, oh, that looks bad. And I'm like kind of stuck staring at whatever I see looks bad on the screen. So if you are able to pull that off, I got to give my props to you because I think they did a very great job with that. Another thing that we really like to talk about, we're still in this non spoiler section, is the acting. And I think this is where the movie does deserve its most praise. Is this might be one of the best acted movies that I've seen this year. As far as acting goes, personally for me, it's right up there with Dune 2. It was that good. Did you feel that same way about the acting? And we had a star-studded cast, so we were expecting some great acting, but did it deliver for you knowing the cast that we got and what you were kind of going into expecting?
Yeah. Now, bring in that comparison of Dune 2, I do have my reservations. I don't think it was as good as Dune 2.
Okay.
I don't think the lead had the same star power and gripping me. I don't think Paul Mescal did a bad job at all. I think he was wonderful, but I just don't think he was quite as good there as
Timothy Chalamet.
Timothy Chalamet was in Dune. I think Timothy Chalamet is one of the best performances of the decade and
Mm-hmm.
potentially of this century for a lead character, especially under the age of 30. Paul Mescal did a good job. He did very good, but I think the actual star of this movie for me, acting wise, was Joseph Quinn. I think his character as the Emperor Geta was phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
He was menacing and kind of off his rocker a little bit, and I loved everything they did with him. I thought that really showed his range coming off of Eddie and then knowing what he's going to be going into in the Fantastic Four. I really liked Joseph Quinn in this movie. I think he may have done the best job. Denzel is Denzel,
Mm-hmm.
and he always delivers. I don't think I've ever watched a Denzel Washington movie and been disappointed with his acting. Connie Nielsen, Lucilia, I feel like hers was also one of those points where I felt like she was not giving it her all. I don't think she did a bad job, but I think there was some on the table left for her. And then Pedro did a great job. I'm continually impressed by Pedro Pascal. Every time I think that he's maybe not the best of actors, he comes in and
He
just
delivers.
does a phenomenal performance. He's um, always on his cues. He is versatile. I was not expecting him to have this type of a role in the movie as the general. I didn't really do much research into this movie going into it, and I was very pleased with Pedro. So yeah, overall acting was very, very good, top notch level acting. A few knocks here and there, not as good as Dune 2, because I think that's probably the gold standard for me. Uh, Maybe that's just the movie style. Maybe that's just directors, maybe not actor, but yes, I think the acting was very good.
Now, one thing I want to touch on that you touched on is Joseph Quinn. And I feel like he's one of those actors that we're continually giving flowers to. And I don't know why I'm so surprised every time I see him in a project and then I go and watch it and I'm blown away by his acting. I think he's really starting to get into that upper echelon of acting that when he's included in a project, I think I need to just go into that movie expecting him to perform because he does continually perform. You know, you mentioned Eddie in Stranger Things. This really does broaden his range a lot because I never thought it was Joseph Quinn for a single time when he was on screen. I just didn't. I didn't correlate him to anything else. He just did a phenomenal job. And another thing I want to talk about that you mentioned is Pedro Pascal, and he does the same thing for me. Now, I feel like he's really good already, and this movie was just such an awesome performance by him that it also did something for me that I'm very excited for. And I literally told my wife when we got in the car, I'm so pumped for Fantastic Four now because Joseph Quinn and Pedro Pascal being two of the actors in there
Yep.
is going to be incredible. And I just feel like I hate this feeling. Pedro Pascal, I feel like, is never getting, you know, he's had some great, you know, star roles. He's been such a supporting actor in so many roles here recently, though. I mean, outside of The Mandalorian, but he's like really not even there because it's not him most of the time, and he's wearing a helmet, so you really don't get to see his range as much. I hope with Fantastic Four that we get to see a Pedro Pascal that is the star of the show. And I've heard so many reports now, and I don't want to get into a Fantastic Four thing, but it's just coming off of how great I loved his acting in Gladiator II. I want to see more Pedro Pascal. So that's my only reserve with Fantastic Four is Marvel, please give him a lot of lines and let him really dominate the show because I think he's fantastic. But yeah, Fantastic Four I couldn't be any more excited for it after watching these two come off of the performance they just gave us because it was incredible.
Yeah, and I was thinking the same thing actually. There was one scene where they were both in it and I was like, "Man, we got half the Fantastic Four here. This is some top level acting here."
Yeah.
They did a really good job. Now, as far as acting, there was two emperors. How did you feel the other emperor held up to Joseph Quinn, Fred Hetchinger's character?
So I think he did a good job, but I don't think it was on the level of Joseph Quinn. But I also don't think that's necessarily his fault because he was definitely written as a co-emperor. You know, we could tell that
Yeah.
Joseph Quinn's emperor was the leader, right? Even though they were co-emperor together and they were twins, you could definitely tell who the leader of that group was. Obviously, Joseph Quinn was given more of a chance to shine. He had more lines. He had more screen time. So I'm not going to say that he did bad, but I don't think it was as good, but I also don't think he was written to be as good. I think that was more part of the directing and the writing style that they chose to go with. Again, I think he did well, but I don't think it was really even close or even really fair, though, to compare to Joseph Quinn.
The not being fair to compare, I think, is a really good point of it because honestly, I think the acting of it was very, very good. He
Mm-hmm.
was believable. What he did in that role, I think, was very talented. But I agree with you. I don't know if there's quite comparison because of the drastic differences, which we're not going to touch on here in spoilers fully. But I do really like that comparison that those both brought to the table, both top notch actors. Which I don't know anything about Fred, but he did a bang up job for what he was given, and I think he was really hindered by just what his role was, but
Yeah.
it was good. I think he did a good job too. I'm not gonna take any flowers away from him because of the role he had to play, because I think he definitely did exactly what they wanted him to do in that role. And for me, he did it. Like I never for once thought like, man, that guy's phoning it in. Like he's not making it believable. No, I believed every second he was on screen.
Yeah, and I think it really just continues to speak to how good the acting was in this movie. I know you did say there was a few parts that you didn't like as much. For me personally, I think everyone did a really fantastic job. So that's my take on the acting. I think we both can agree, though, it was a phenomenally acted movie. The last thing I want to talk about in the non-spoiler part of this is just the story. And obviously, we're not going to talk about it. One of our big things for this movie, though, was why are we getting a Gladiator II? It felt like one of those things we didn't really need. We see that a lot with Hollywood nowadays, is they're just giving us sequels to things that we don't need sequels to. What did you think of the story that they did give us? Did you like it, and did you feel like it was a worthwhile story to be told when we already have such a beloved movie like Gladiator? Did this make sense to give us now?
I will tell you, I will much rather get this quality of a sequel over a remake any day. I think this is a worthy movie to be told, especially with the care that was put into it and the quality of the product that we got. I can understand not needing a sequel to this movie, but it's original. It's not a rehash. It's not they're not going step for step over the same beats. Now there's definitely some parallels to the first Gladiator for sure, but nothing is really the exact same. They pay homage to the first one very well in this movie, and I'm happy with the product they got. I honestly am. I'd say it over performed my estimation, my expectations for this film. I think my expectations were a little lower, especially story wise, and so they exceeded that with this story. I'm very happy with what we got. I do think there were pacing issues, and potentially they tried to tell too much story, which is actually the opposite of what I thought was going to happen. I thought they were going to have no story to tell at all and kind of pull something out. And so I think there was pacing issues for me personally, but other than that, I think the story we got was pretty good. How did you feel about it?
I personally really love the story. I think they did such a good job with it. It was one of those movies I also went into not expecting to be told a great story. I did expect it to be really just the same old that we got, but I did really love what they did with it. And I also thought the parallels were very tastefully done because we do get clips pulled straight from the Gladiator movie in this one. And when they were done, sometimes I get annoyed when sequels do that because it almost feels like they're just putting it in there just to add time to the movie, right? They want to get that time up a little bit. They want to make it feel like you're getting your worth money. I don't think they did that with this movie. I think all of the flashback scenes that we got, all the movies parts that we got pulled from the Gladiator were really tastefully done. So I do want to give them some credit for that, which was really cool. It's always cool when it's like a love letter to the first movie. You know, we're really building upon what they did. We're also still reminding people of what we have done, but this is what we're doing now. And so I thought they did a really great job with that. I really love the story overall, and I really couldn't be happier with the product that we got on screen. You know, this was a movie that I told you I wasn't even super pumped about. I think the first Gladiator movie is great, but I also didn't think it was as good as everyone else acts like it is. After watching this movie, I do think I need to go back and rewatch the first one because it's been a while, been a few years since I've watched the first one. I think I might need to reevaluate that movie as a whole because I really, really did like this one. And I know a lot of people have said it is right on par with that movie. And if I go back and watch Gladiator again and I get the same excitement and joy that I got out of this one, I think I do need to reevaluate my top movie list of all time because that's how good this movie was, in my opinion. Story wise, acting wise, CGI. I think they just did a really phenomenal job, and I'm super happy with the product that we did get on the big screens.
How many times have you watched the first Gladiator, do you think?
I would say because it's one of those movies I know I've watched it and sat down and watched it at least twice, but I would say if I've probably watched the movie maybe 4 or 5 times because that was one of those movies back when we had cable TV way back in the day that you would just find on TV and you would just kind of turn it on and leave it. I probably watched it a bunch of times like that. So I know for sure I've sat down and watched it twice, but overall I probably watched through it about 4 or 5 times, you know, bits and pieces of it here and there whenever I would see it on. So that's why I think I do need to go back and re-give it a chance because it's probably been about 6 or 7 years since I watched the first Gladiator. So maybe it's just something that I've kind of forgotten about how good it was. So maybe I do need to go back and reevaluate it a little bit.
Yeah, personally, I do think it deserves top 50 movies of all time. The first Gladiator.
Mhm.
And I think, man, every time I go back and rewatch that one, it is such a good film, and it really is. To me personally, I'm going to go ahead and say it. I don't think Gladiator Two is close to the first one.
Okay.
I think that Gladiator Two is very solid film. But if we're comparing apples for apples, I definitely think Gladiator One stands head and shoulders above the second one.
Well, I guess I really need to go back and watch it then because I love Gladiator 2. I thought it was such a good movie. But I think that's kind of our non-spoiler review,
What
unless there's anything else.
do you want to go ahead and rate it for those who are wondering where this stands for us but haven't watched it and are going to watch it? Should we go ahead and drop our ratings on this
Yeah,
one?
go ahead. Let's drop our rating for this one. I want to hear yours first though, because After hearing you just say it's not even close to the first one, I'm really interested to see where you do rate this one.
Okay, so personally for me, I think this one probably stands. I really want to give it an 8. I want to give it an 8, but I'm kind of leaning towards 7. But I'm actually gonna go ahead and give it an 8. I'm gonna give it an
Okay.
8 out of 10. I think it's definitely a significantly better movie than I've given some sevens. This is one of those points where I kind of wish that I did halves
Hmm.
because I think it really kind of deserves like a 7 and 7 quarters. 7 quarters. Oh my goodness. A seven
Man,
and
we're really breaking it
seven.
down if we're going to start doing quarter points.
Well, it's, 7 quarters. It's like a 9. It's a 9.1. No. Okay.
9.25, you know.
Yeah. We're. Uh,
We're
okay.
changing the game. We're changing the game with
Yeah.
our new
Compose.
rating scale, guys.
Breathe. Yes. I really do think this is a 7.7 around there. But I'm going to go ahead and give it an 8. I
Okay.
think the pacing issues with the story and then just some of the story aspects for me and some of the inconsistencies that I've seen throughout the movie, there are some glaring inconsistencies that really drop it down for me that keep it away from the 9 level. And honestly, that is what I'm thinking is keeping it away from the 8 is uh, those quick change ups, those quick pacing moments where we're kind of just like flying through the story, and then we have some moments where things should happen and they do not happen. So those are the things that are maybe pushing me closer to a 7, but I'm going to give it an 8, and we'll let it lie there. We'll reevaluate in a week or two and see where it still stands. But as for now, weekly fixed rating, Zane, I'm giving it an 8. Where are you at?
So again, this is where the half points I think would be so beneficial because I'm back and forth. I'm right there at an 8.5. Like I think it's better than an 8, but I don't quite know that it's a 9 because I do feel like that about some of the pacing issues. I did feel like there was a few moments where like I was expecting something to happen or us to get a little bit more of a story point, and then we jumped forward to something that I was kind of surprised that we got to that point. And that's something we're going to talk a little bit more about in our spoiler part of this episode. But I'm really torn here because I do think it's better than an 8, but I don't quite think it's a 9. And I think whenever you're really reserved like that, 9s are really for that like upper echelon of movie. And I'm so close to giving it that. But I think I'm also going to go ahead and give it an 8. I think after I sit with it a little bit more, maybe after I watch the first Gladiator movie, again, that might change my mind a little bit more about it being as close to a 9 as I kind of have it in my head. But I think I'm going to go ahead and be a little more reserved. I'm going to give it an 8. I'm also going to sit on it for the week because, again, we're fresh out of the movie theaters. So I'm still super excited. And I still really did love the product that we got on the screen. When you talk about, like, one thing we didn't talk about in our non-spoiler part of the review, and it's a big point for me, as we've joked a lot about in the podcast, the action was phenomenal. Like, that's a big point for me that I really, really loved about this movie. And I thought it was so well done. I thought the fight scenes were well choreographed. I thought it was just a really, really fun time. So I'm really close to giving it a 9, but I also don't quite know that it was there yet. So I'm going to go ahead and give it an 8. Again, that is subject to change after we sat on it for a little longer. But I think 8 is a very, very strong score for a movie that we both probably weren't super pumped for.
Yeah. I didn't think that this would have an 8 in my mind. I thought this was going to be around a 6, probably something I wouldn't watch again, but enjoyed. But this is definitely one that I'll seek out to watch again. I'm definitely going to watch this with my wife because she unfortunately didn't get to go with us tonight. She was at another event, so I was very pleased, and I'm proud. I'm proud of you for dropping it to an 8. I think it's worthy. I don't think it's in that 9 level. I think those movies are kind of reserved for things that just stand really at quite a difference. Quite a that 9 section is really, really good because
Yeah.
that's what I have the first one at. I have the first one rated as a 9, and I don't have it at a 10 for some reasons. It's just not one of my favorites of all time. I guess it is one of my favorites of all time, but tens are very reserved for me.
Hmm.
So I'm very cautious with that, especially with movies. I think it's actually easier for shows to get 10s for me than it is a movie because they have less time to really pull off everything.
Yeah.
It's easier to make mistakes. So, hey, an 8's a great score. I'm happy with it.
Yeah. 8 is a phenomenal score. I think if you guys are on the fence about going to see this movie, I can feel comfortable telling you it is worth going to the movie theaters for. I do think it'll actually translate very well to a home TV screen, though. So I don't think if you're something you just don't have time for, I completely understand that. I think you will have a fantastic time watching this at home on your couch. I actually look forward to doing that. And I think one of the biggest praises you can give a movie is that, yes, I would watch it again. And I definitely feel like this is a movie I'd watch again. So we're both going to watch it again at some point, I'm sure. I think that's a really great way to send off a non-spoiler part of a movie is by telling you we would watch it again. An 8 is a super solid score. But I'm really pumped to talk about the spoiler part of this movie because there's some really cool stuff in here I want to talk about. And I just want to talk. Let's go ahead and start off with the thing that we both felt a little bit iffy about. And it's those early on pacing moments that we felt like kind of were rushed through. What part of those movie did you feel like there was the biggest pacing issue?
It was undoubtedly the him from the time he gets captured to the time that he's at the Coliseum. It is just a hold on to your seat. We're getting there moment. The fight with the monkey. It seems like there's no development between him getting captured and him coming to Rome. I feel like that is just a fast paced bullet train that we are put on, and I think that's honestly kind of why they. I think that's one of the reasons they kind of struggled so much with what's everything that's going on. I think if they would have eliminated the first 20 minutes of the movie and just started with him waking up in the water, I actually think we might have actually had a better paced movie if they took their time with that development a little bit more instead of giving us that intro, which I don't actually think paid too much homage to the rest of the movie.
Mm-mm.
In my opinion, that's one of the issues I had with it was that the emotional weight that they wanted to give us, I don't think quite held, especially with the twist up at the end that they pulled off with the switch and emotional bait. There really wasn't too much at the end of the movie that was emotional for our protagonist as there was at the beginning. So that's kind of my issue with it, and I think that's where my pacing issues lie.
Yeah, I felt the same way because we do get to the Coliseum so fast. And this is a long movie. 2 hours and 20 minutes is not a short amount of time for a movie. So they definitely gave themselves a lot of time to do a lot of stuff. And I think they did get a lot of cool stuff done. But I felt the same way. I felt like we got to the Coliseum so fast. And I feel like we didn't really get a chance to process that beginning part of the movie, like you said. So, beginning part of the movie, we see, um, I think his name is Lucius.
Yeah, Lucian.
And yeah, Paul Mescal's character. So we see him kind of in another like kingdom kind of thing set up. And we see them getting invaded by the Romans, and then 10 minutes later, we're in a Colosseum fighting. And so those beginning of that movie, we did see a little bit of stuff. We do see his wife die, which I think they were expecting to hit home really hard for a lot of us, but they didn't give us a reason to because we only see his wife for maybe 5 minutes of the movie. So I think those are some of those things they could have done a little bit of a better job on, but it's not something that I'm looking back on and I like despise. But I do agree with what you said. If maybe they had cut that, they show us him waking up in the water after he had got hit and fell top of their castle. I think it might have been a little bit better just to start there and get right into it than to give us that little bit of backstory that, like you said, did not pay dividends at all.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the points where I'm like, Paul Mescal did a great job, but I didn't quite feel the emotion that he had. They kept talking about his anger and his rage, but there really was. It's a lot harder to portray those softer emotions for me than it is for anger and rage. So that may be one of the reasons that I'm thinking his acting wasn't quite to the level of the Dune Part Two, because I think his character being portrayed as a rageful, angry person really doesn't lend itself to someone who is able to portray the entire emotional spectrum. And I don't think he dealt with his wife's death appropriately probably in this film. Now what I do absolutely love in this movie was the moments when it fades to black and white and we get to see him kind of in the I guess it would be the Greek what is that called, purgatory almost, where he's getting to
Mhm.
see his wife sail across the river with the token. I think that was really well done. I thought those were really good moments and a great homage to Gladiator, where he's in the field and he's going to his wife. I thought that was a really good parallel that they were pulling from the first one with a little bit of switch up and very cinematography, very stylized. I really like that. How did you feel about those moments?
No, I thought those were really good because those are the moments that do hit a little bit. Those are the ones that take you slow down for a second, and you really kind of get to experience what he's feeling. So I thought they did a really good job with those. I think anytime you do those type of scenes and you get some good music playing in the background, it really sets the tone, and it's really just a really awesome scene to watch and get to appreciate in kind of a different way. So those were really cool scenes. Obviously, I touched on a little bit in the non-spoiler part. I just loved the action, and they did a really, really great job in the Colosseums of making things look so cool, look like exciting to watch, and I just liked all the action that we got. Is there any action scenes that stand out for you that you really loved, and you were like, that was really cool that we got to see that?
I was actually surprised about the action scenes with the the fight scene at the start. The fight scene at the start was a scene that I thought was going to be a waste, but it actually was very well done. It felt
Mhm.
large. It didn't seem like a small scale at all. It seemed like it had stakes, it had consequences, and it's so funny because that's one of the things that's like, hey, if we just skip past this, then it probably would have done a little better. But that's one of the ones that really stood out to me. The other ones were good, and I like them. There was things that I really liked when he was trying to stab the general in that fight, and he couldn't quite get the angle on the sword, and it really allowed the fight to prolong when they were grappled. I thought that was good because how many times do you see someone just be able to get this unrealistic angle on somebody when they're fighting and have the force to stab someone? So I thought the general fight versus him was very good. Um, the ending of that was emotional. So there was a really good moment there. I mean, they were just really good. There was a few fight scenes that I thought were very bad. One of those being the fight against Vigo when he had the bronze gloves, like the brass knuckle spiky
Yeah.
gloves on. And dude, okay, so for those of you who haven't seen it, who are listening to spoilers, bravo for sticking in here. But they got he literally gets punched in the face by a dude who's wearing spiked metal gloves, and he is just taking it. And it's not like this wimp. It is the gladiator trainer. He's not cut, he's not down. He is taking it like a champ, and he takes 4 or 6 hits,
Oh yeah.
like straight to the face, unblocked with these gloves, and he's perfectly fine. Doesn't even have like a scratch during the fight. And I was like, what is going on? Like, why put the gloves on? Like,
Yeah.
you don't need those gloves. If you're not gonna have the gloves have impacts, like, why put the gloves on? So there was some good action, some very good action, and then there was some not so great action.
Well, and it's not even that I would say it's not so great. It's just like questionable decision making. Like that would have been a great scene, I think, if we just don't include those gloves. Which
Correct.
why
Yeah.
do
Like,
it?
why?
But yeah, one of my favorite scenes, I loved it. Is it's really like the first Coliseum fight, and we see the gladiators, the new fresh gladiators, are trying to work their way up the ranks. They all get thrown into the Coliseum, and we see the undefeated gladiator ride in on a rhino. I was like, let's go. This dude is riding a rhinoceros. He's got all sorts of weapons he's pulling out of this thing. He's throwing axes. He's twisting people's ankles up with some like rope net. I forget what that weapon is called. But I loved that, and I kept waiting for the scene. I was like, please have this rhinoceros just spear somebody. I just want to see this rhinoceros horn just cut right through somebody. And lo and behold, we get an awesome scene where this rhinoceros takes his horn, smashes it right up through somebody's chest, and sends them flying through the air. I thought that was so cool. That was like a highlight of the movie for me because I was like, when I saw that rhinoceros walk out, I was like, yes. So there's some really cool things. I love the water fight when they were in the boats in the Coliseum. I thought that was really, really cool, really well done. That was one of the moments where I felt like the CGI shined. I didn't get taken out of that. And again, we talk about those water scenes being the ones where it's super easy to tell. I did not get taken out of that scene at all. I loved it. I love that they included the sharks in it. I thought that was super cool. So just some of those things that they did there with the action stuff. And you guys know I'm an action junkie. I want to see that type of stuff. Those are the things that get me pumped in a movie. I loved those scenes. I thought they were really, really well done.
So talking about the water scene, how did you feel about the archers shooting and him standing in the boat the entire time and never getting popped.
Yeah, so I obviously you do have to turn your head on some of those scenes, especially because he doesn't even really like dodge or anything. He really kind of is just like standing there.
Oh,
So,
Captain,
you
my
know,
Captain.
yeah, literally, he was going down with that ship. Like, so I thought that was really cool. I thought the best part of that scene though was when we see him pick up that crossbow and we see him try to take a shot at General Acacius, who General Acacius is played by Pedro Pascal. He's actually the general that overtook where he came from. So there's a lot of like hatred between him, really just Lucius' character and General Acacius, because we do find out that General Acacius actually is a pretty good guy. He's actually trying to overthrow the Roman Empire because he's not happy with the way it's being done. He's sick of taking over countries and territories in the way that he's doing it. So we see that scene. I thought that was a really impactful scene where we see him try to kill him because they're both kind of shocked by it. We get to see the emperors freak out a little bit. I thought that was a really cool scene.
Yeah, and because no one really knows that they took a shot at General Cassius, they actually think it was at the Emperor's.
Yes,
So I
yes.
think that also plays weight to it. I think I think that feud between those two would have been so much better if General Cassius was the one who killed his wife. If he was the one that killed Airshot, I think that would
Yeah.
have played a lot heavier throughout the film. But just the fact that he was there driving this insane hatred for him, I mean, I guess you got to put it somewhere, but I really feel like it was almost misguided hatred. And so I think that was a miss too. I think if General Acacius would have been the one who killed Airshot, not only would he have to deal with that himself emotionally, and maybe that would be the driving force to make him not be super Roman favored, and maybe turn on the emperors himself as opposed to like just standing over the graves. I think if there was a little bit more emotion for him there in that moment, I think that might have played a little bit better throughout the film. How do you feel about maybe something like that?
I felt the same way because I kind of hated the feud between them for that exact same reason. And I also feel like it would have been really cool is if we did get to see them work together in some capacity when they do come to find out that, hey, he's actually a good guy. He's got this army that's fully devoted to him that he's going to try to overthrow the emperors for. We have that really great scene where they do fight that you were talking about where they're trying to get that angle on each other to try to stab each other. And we actually see General Acacius drop to his knees and say, listen, I would have died for your father, who his father was Maximus. I thought that was such a good scene that we see him also come to terms with the fact that, you know what, maybe this guy isn't so bad. Maybe it really is the Roman Empire that I'm upset with and angry with. And I did kind of put my hatred on somebody else in spite of that. So I felt like that would have been really cool. I really would have liked to see, like, instead of them just pelting General Acacius with a bunch of arrows, I would thought it'd been cool if we got to see them send out a bunch of other soldiers and we got to see them have like a little, fight with each other, helping each other, taking care of each other, watching each other's backs. That would have been really cool. But I do think they did a good job with General Acacius's death. It was very impactful. It was kind of shocking. I did not expect him to die in the moment that he did. How did you feel about that?
So I honestly kind of expected him to die in that moment because I don't really know how they get out of it. And that's one of the things I was about to say. Like, I didn't feel like any of these fights actually had a tremendous amount of emotional weight. And I think that's what it was missing for me. Even though the action was good, I didn't feel emotional like throughout the fight. And the best fights for me have that emotional weight. You think of the first Gladiator, where Russell Crowe is fighting the Emperor, and that is an emotional fight between Maximus and Commodus. Like, it is a huge moment, build up for the entire fight. And then you go to this one, and the final fight between Lucius and General Achaeus, um, Acacius, right? Acacius.
Mhm.
Um,
Yes.
he's having that. It's not emotional. And there's an emotional switch through it throughout the fight where he goes into it angry and then throughout it he switches. And then you get to see the final fight between Denzel and Paul Mescal, Lucius and Macrinus. You kind of it's also not super emotional for me because I'm seeing this 60-year-old dude fight this young gladiator, and I'm like, why is he even standing up to him? Like, this fight is over before it begins. And so I personally like the only way that fight would have been emotional for me is if Lucius died and then everyone turned on Macrinus. I feel like that might have been an even better ending
Mhm.
emotionally for that fight because it would have had some of that shock value. But I'm gonna go ahead and pull it back to like Dune. because that's the movie of the year. That's what we're comparing everything to, acting,
Yeah.
everything else. But when Fade Roth and Paul Atreides fight, and they cut that music, and we have that, Thy Night Ship and Shatter, like that is an emotional fight. There's a lot weighing on that, and I think we might have missed that in this movie. And I don't know personally what they could have done fully to encapsulate that for me, because other people may have it. I know that was potentially a me issue, and it may be with the pacing of the story that I felt like it was just too quick to sit with some of the deaths that we experienced, or maybe it didn't feel like the characters actually deserved the emotional weight behind it. But how did you feel like that? Did you feel like any of these fights had emotional weight behind them?
I didn't feel like the General Acacius and Lucius fight did. I feel like that fight was kind of just like we kind of have to do it because we've done all these other things in the movie that are leading up to this point, and that's what Lucius has wanted the entire movie. He keeps telling Macrinus, "Hey, I want his head on a platter. Like I want to be given that opportunity to avenge my wife again, even though he wasn't the one that killed his wife." So that one didn't have much weight to it, especially after the things we've talked about. I felt like the Macrinus fight got the weight, but only, and it's not even like super heavyweight. It only got some of that weight because Macrinus does end up killing his mother. And I didn't really like the way that she died. I kind of wish there would have been a different way they go about it. I would have liked to see Macrinus really just kind of, stab her in front of everybody or something like that, rather than just like shooting an arrow at her while a bunch of other fighting's going on and like people wouldn't have even noticed it was him. There would have been more weight and more hatred in that scene because Macrinus did have an army behind him, and it wasn't until he dies that that army decides that they're going to follow Lucius, who is the rightful heir to the throne. So there is weight in that very final fight between him and Macrinus, but I didn't feel like, again, it's not that Dune level fight because like everything is riding on that Dune fight. This one kind of just felt like, well, even if Lucius would have died, we would have seen the army of General Acacius still go to war with the other army of Rome, right? That was still going to happen regardless, unless Lucius wins that fight. So I felt like there was some weight there, but I agree with you. I don't feel like it was like super heavy, like we probably would have liked to see for that ending fight scene.
Yeah, and even the death of his mother, when I didn't feel anything for that. And I think that's because of the emotion that he showed towards her in the prison cell at the start.
Yeah.
Like why did he have that disdain for her and then the switch up? It would have been better almost if he wouldn't have had the switch up, that he would have just held that disdain, and then after losing her broke down and actually realized that she did love him, and that this was this big moment that he needed to recover from. So I felt like her death was almost useless in that moment. It would have been better for her not, to take that arrow, because I think there could have been a lot of emotional resonance with him dealing with her after, as opposed to just losing her in that moment, because of how they showed him respond to her throughout the film. So
Well, I'm glad you actually mentioned that scene in the cell because that's actually my biggest complaint of the movie. I did hate that switch up. And I've tried to go back and forth with myself like where did the switch up happen? Why did it happen? And we obviously see that switch up happen after General Acacius dies and they've had that little bit of a conversation like, "Hey, I'm trying to save Rome. I'm trying to build it back up to its former glory. I believe in Marcus Aurelius and what your father Maximus were doing." I can understand the switch up a little bit there between him and his mom, but that first scene with his mom, he literally screams at her to get out of his cell, and he's acting like his young self, the Lucius that we do know him as, is dead. So I did not appreciate that scene as much because I'm like, this switch up is too much. And we've talked about that a lot in a lot of different shows where we see someone have a switch up that's just way, way, way too intense without being giving a lot more of story and a lot more time to see that develop. That was my personal biggest gripe with the movie was that switch up.
yeah, and I'm not even saying that switch up came completely out of left field, and I don't think you are either. Like there was some justification for it,
Mm-hmm.
but I agree with you. I don't think there was enough to justify the extremely large switch up that he pulled off in that moment. So, but yeah, I mean, it's a good movie, and I know I just kind of pulled out a bunch of negatives, but I thought one of the cool things was you touched on that sea fight. The sea fight was pretty cool. I really enjoyed that. I loved hearing your wife actually describe that that was real and accurate to history, which I didn't know. So the fact that they actually did fill the Coliseum with water and have sea fights on it is pretty fascinating to me. So that was cool to see and to know that that actually did it because it seems unrealistic. But hey, it's apparently something they did. I loved the emperor assigning his monkey to the Senate or to his advisory board because we do know that there was a senator in history that assigned his horse to the Senate, and it's kind of just along the same lines, right? The Romans were crazy. And so
Yes.
I love that aspect of it. I love that his mind was being lost to syphilis because he was too sexually promiscuous promiscuous, and so I do think that was also good. I like that the fact that that was a change up that we got to see as well. And just some of the consequences of their decisions were shown throughout that the Romans were not great. And so they were fighting for a new Rome, but the new Rome they're fighting for is not historically accurate. Like Rome sucked. So I think that was also pretty good.
Well, it's funny too. Like I told my wife on my way home, I was like, it's so crazy that like some of this stuff really did happen. We did have gladiators, we did have fights like this taking place in coliseums, and here I am in today's day and age underwriting insurance. Like it's crazy how much we've come to a complete full swing from way back then. I do love one thing that you did just talk about again is we did see the one emperor, falling to his sins and stuff like that. But they did that. They showed us those things without ever showing it happening, which I thought that was really well done. They didn't have to show us that, oh, he's, doing this and this is why he got sick. We could just tell from the things that they did show us. It never got too sexual. It never pushed any boundaries or anything like that. So again, we talked about it a little bit earlier on in the episode. I thought that was just a really good point to bring up, though, that they just did a really good job with keeping the movie as clean as they could with the story they were still trying to tell.
Yeah, and they did a good job with that. I really appreciate that there wasn't language.
Yeah.
This is a clean podcast. We have Christian values and we have morals. So anytime we can get a rated R movie that is pretty much rated R just for violence, me and Jacob are both going to be very happy.
Yes.
I'm not quite on the level as Jacob is on the like let's see all the stuff, but
Man, I'm telling you,
um,
I was so pumped when we saw that rhinoceros spear that
yeah.
dude. But
Yeah, how did I thought also the cool scene with the emperors and how they came to their final resting place. I thought that was
yep.
a very I honestly didn't quite see the full manipulation of Macronus coming. I thought that was pretty cool. I definitely didn't see him killing the one emperor by the other one's hand, by literally holding the other one's hand. And it was good. I thought that was a really well done. I loved how he kind of slipped his way in and manipulated him. The only issue I have with that, which I do have some issues, as you all know, I'm always going to have some issues, but I felt like that was also a little bit too fast. Him going from where he was at to Emperor's right hand. I felt like that was incredibly fast. I don't know. His position wasn't really well stated beforehand, but it seemed like he was a little bit lower. He's not in the Senate. He's literally an owner of gladiators. And then to kind of work his way to where he did seemed a little bit too much for me. How did you feel about his progression in status?
Well, I think it did do a good job of just showing the type of Rome that we were being given. I do think if we went back in time, someone that is in the entertainment industry, like his character was, providing these gladiators to fight, probably would have been a pretty highly respected person by the emperors because that's the enjoyment that they got. They wanted to see that stuff. I think they did a good job of showing us the manipulation of not really what he was doing, but the way he was taking advantage of the emperor that had all the mental issues and stuff like that. I don't think this obviously wouldn't have worked on the other emperor, which is why he decided to kill that one, is because he knew he needed to get to the one with the weaker mind, the one that really didn't, was literally physically ill. So I think they did a good job of showing that, but I also do agree. I think it was very fast for him to get up as quick as he did. We really got to see him bypass a lot of people, but I also did kind of believe it because the way these emperors were acting and the things they were saying, if someone would have came to them and told them about a resurrection that was happening against them, they probably would have been like, oh shoot, thank you for doing this. We're going to reward you handsomely for what you did. So I do think it was a little quick, but I do think they did a good enough job of justifying him moving up as quick as he did.
Yeah, I think everything was really good outside of him getting the seat before the emperors got killed, right? So that
Mhm.
that was really my issue. I do agree with you. The Senate definitely getting on board after seeing him get rid of their issue, right? No one was happy that those two clowns were in power. So
No.
I agree with that. Yeah, my issue was solely with the start of his rise to power, nothing else.
Yeah, and you got to say we did touch on it. This was a very Denzel role. I think he killed it. It definitely was like he was kind of meant for this role. His flair, the way he acted, the things he brought to the story were really, really fun. Now, one thing I didn't expect though was for his character to have quite the impact on the story that he did. And maybe that's just for me not really keeping up with the story, and I didn't watch all the trailers for this movie. Did you kind of expect him to have such a big role in this movie?
No, I did not see it. And then I like the little tie-in where he was his grandfather's slave, Marcus Aurelius.
Yes,
I like that aspect of it. I don't really see how I don't personally know how the economic landscape of that time was, and if that was possible. It seems like it probably wouldn't have been, in my opinion. But hey, we'll rock with it. I thought it was a cool little twist there that he was able to rise to power in that moment, coming from a slave to essentially leader of Rome, even if it was just for a day. But that I thought that was really cool and a good little thread to put in there to tie together. Once again, I don't think it had the emotional weight that they were hoping it did, and the payoff that it may or may not have wanted to have, but it definitely was a good thing to include. I don't think it was harmful to the story at all and only could benefit. But I just don't. I think they may have thought that would have had a little bit more payoff than it did. But for me, it was just, oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and I think that this movie did have a lot of that, and we talked about that a little bit with the little flashbacks that they did and kind of pulling scenes from the first Gladiator movie. I thought one of the coolest scenes we got to see was when Lucius he asks about what name is that marked out on the wall, and we see the one doctor, the Gladiator doctor Ravi, kind of says, "Oh, that was Maximus's name," and we get to see them go down into the catacombs where he says that all the gladiators that died, they're buried here, and we get to see that Maximus had kind of his own little spot where we got to see his armor up on the wall, his swords, and then we got to see his little quote. I forget exactly what it says, but it's like decisions we make today echoes in eternity or something along those lines. You might know the exact quote. I thought that was a really cool scene. And then by the end of the movie, we get to see Lucius don his father's armor when he walks out for the final time into the Colosseum to defend his mother. I thought that was a really cool scene. Did you like that one?
I love that scene. I really appreciated how they kind of had like all the rebels, like you said, all the rebel gladiators that died are buried here. Very special, very good homage to the first one. Very appropriate for what Maximus did. It would have been a massive moment, and honestly, this movie, I think personally, makes the first one better because it kind of confirms what we all assumed in the first one, that Lucius was his son and that
Mm-hmm.
most of what he did in that movie was for him. And the truth comes out, hey, it was 100%. And those relationships become even more strong in the first movie because of this movie. And I think that's actually kind of a cool aspect too.
And that's an also it goes back to what we were talking about how we felt like this was actually a deserving sequel is when it does make the first movie better. That's all you can ask for from a sequel, I think. Obviously you'd like for the sequel to always be better, but I think as long as it does its job of making the first movie even better and make you just enjoy the universe more, I think that's really cool. I love that scene. I thought it was so cool. And it had those flashbacks a lot. When we see him enter the Coliseum for the very first time and we see that rhinoceros and all that stuff going on, we see him throw his sword down into the sand and he kind of bends down and picks it up and he feels it in his hands like we see Maximus do. And that's kind of when his mom, who is still higher up in the Senate, realizes that probably is her son that she sent away after Maximus died. I thought that was really cool. Again, there's a lot of really cool parallels that they did to this movie that I thought were very tastefully done.
Yeah. And I, you say that scene, and I think of him getting smacked by a rhinoceros and then getting up and fighting. You know,
Yeah, man, I'm
I
telling you,
I
something
can't
he
I
didn't
can't
have
help
just
but laugh.
armor on. He didn't have just armor on. He had plot armor on. That stuff
Mm.
is
Oh,
so
dude,
strong.
he had
It's
some plot
stronger than
armor,
Beskar.
dude. My brother got to go with us, and a shout out to Zach. Thanks for tagging along. I had a blast, and I appreciate you going with us. But after he got done rowing in the training sequence, and his hands are raw because the skin is gone, and they pour some vinegar on it. And then the next morning he wakes up and his hands are pristinely clean, not a scratch on him. And I just leaned over and I was like, hands look pretty good. And he laughed and was like, that's some powerful vinegar. There's definitely some injury consistencies that are
Yeah.
pretty rough as well. But that was one that I was like, okay, like don't show his hands being raw. Like don't show the hands.
So I
If
had
you're
the same. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, I was just like you can show him in pain and sore and tired. Like, yeah, his hands would have been raw if he rode for 8 hours by himself. But if you're gonna show his hands the next morning, they need to be raw. Like you need to
Yeah.
show him gripping a sword in pain. And like, man, this dude has raw hands and he doesn't care. He doesn't give a crap. He's gonna take down the emperor regardless. So that was one of the moments where I was like, oh my gosh, like come on, let's get some consistency.
I think my biggest moment that I noticed that was we talked about the very first time they're not in the big coliseum, they're in like the little gladiator like selection like coliseum, I guess you call it, like a little arena,
Okay.
and we see him bite that monkey, and literally like 30 seconds later he has no blood on his face or anything. I thought that was kind of funny, like it just went away, he licked it off and it was good to go. But
Yeah,
no,
he
there's a
wiped
few
it
of
off with his
those.
hand,
Yeah, just 'tis but a flesh wound. But there's a lot of that stuff throughout this movie that I think you could kind of like look past a little bit because there are some of those inconsistencies. Overall, though, I think it was a phenomenal movie. We both gave it an 8. I loved it. I thought it was very fun. I would recommend this to somebody else. Is this something you would recommend to somebody else?
I definitely would. Even talking through it, I definitely think 8. It was such a good movie with acting and visuals and action that some of those plot holes kind of fade away. So
Hmm.
if you can't deal with inconsistencies and some of those issues that we've mentioned in this, I would kind of like hesitate to. Like I think of my friend Guy who's very critical of movies. I don't necessarily think I'd tell him to go see this in the theater. I would recommend him to watch it at home because I think it's definitely worth watching. But like to
Hmm.
go out into the theater, if you enjoy action and you enjoy this time set and this timepiece, definitely I think it's a movie for you. Gladiators and the Roman Empire and all of those things for me are personally stuff that I love. I grew up on movies in this time period. I think like Kingdom of Heaven and all of that I adore sword fighting and this level. So for me, if I know you like that stuff, I'm going to recommend it to you. Uh, for the average viewer, I'd say yeah. If you like rated R movies and you're okay with gore, definitely go watch this. If you're very critical and you can't deal with consistencies, maybe steer clear until you can watch it for a cheaper price.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think I personally would recommend this to anybody, especially for me, a big gauge is my wife loved it. She thought it was such a good movie. She was talking about it the entire car ride home. So I think this is actually a really fun movie, maybe for you and your wife to go see, or maybe for you and your girlfriend, you guys out there. I think it would be a really great couple movie. And I think that's funny to say with how action heavy it is, but I think it does pull a lot of things in there. And obviously it's got, Paul Mescal and Pedro Pascal, so they're not going to be upset watching it with you. So I think those are some of the fun things about this movie. I definitely would recommend it to people. I'm actually looking forward to watching it again. It's definitely going to be watched again. I'm excited to chill on my couch and just get to sit back, relax, and watch some of these really great action scenes because they're going to stick with me for a little while. Like I love that stuff. So I thoroughly enjoyed my time. I don't think I've ever not enjoyed my time at the movie theaters, even when I thought a movie wasn't very good. But this was a really really great time, and I'm super pumped that we did get to go see it because I know we were both mad about it, but you hit me up and you're like, hey, let's go see it Sunday, and I was like, you know what, sure, let's go see it, and I'm definitely happy we did.
Yeah, likewise. If we can get out the movie and watch Venom, I think we definitely need to go watch this one. This one is was a far
Significantly better than
superior,
Venom.
far superior. So
Oh man, poor
yeah,
Venom.
no, what a fun
But
time.
it was a really great time, and I think that's about all we have to talk about. Again, there's might be some things that we bring up a little bit more often, bringing back to this movie in the future on podcasts. But is there anything else you really wanted to hit on before we ended this episode out?
Nah, man, send us out. This was a fun one.
Yeah, so that was our Gladiator II review. We would love to hear what you guys thought about the review. If you guys have had a chance to go see it, let us know your thoughts. If you guys liked it or you think we missed something that maybe we had a complaint about, definitely let us know because we're always open to changing our minds. if we miss something, and maybe you just have a point that's so good that it can push me up to that 9, because I'm so close there. I really did kind of want to give it a 9, but I think there's some things that just hold it back a little bit too much, and I definitely think I'm going to go back and watch the first one to really give it a comparison to this one. But that is this week's episode of Weekly Fix. Don't forget, next week we're going to be doing our Comic Corner episode. We're going to be talking about The Last Ronin. I think that's a perfect continuation after this episode, going into that comic. I'm super pumped to hear about Zane's first time ever reading a Ninja Turtle comic. And you know what, Zane, I know we're not talking about it, but could you just give us a little tease about how you felt about The Last Ronin so far, if you've gotten to finish it? Because I know you had one more issue to read before, today. Give us a little bit of a tease. Just give us, you can say thumbs up, meh, thumbs down. Give us a little something.
First time outing with Ninja Turtles. I'm very impressed. I'll leave it at that.
There we go, guys.
Very impressed.
You're definitely going to have to come back next week to check out our Last Ronin review again. That's one of my favorite books of all time. But that's going to do it for this week's episode of Weekly Fix. Again, we want to thank you all so much for sticking with us. If you guys did enjoy this episode, make sure to rate it. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure to hit that like button. Those things always help out. And make sure to tell a friend about the podcast, because we really do appreciate it. But thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you guys next week.